Welcome to CleanTech Deep Dive. In our last discussion, as you might recall, we explored some of the core aspects of the water industry. Today, we're taking a really crucial step, diving deep into wastewater treatment processes. It's all about understanding how that water you use every day gets cleaned up and why that whole process is so vital for our clean water sources and, well, the overall health of the environment.
Exactly. And it's not just, the water from our homes, toilets, drains, that sort of thing. We're also talking about rainwater runoff, which picks up a surprising amount of pollutants, actually. And then there's wastewater from agriculture and industrial wastewater,
Mm.
which, like you said, can be really complex to treat sometimes.
Right, all those different chemicals involved. So the mission we're on today is to really unpack the essential steps and the technologies used to take all that used water from all those different sources and make it safe enough to return to the environment. Okay, so let's start with the big picture. Who exactly is responsible for making sure all this wastewater treatment happens effectively?
Well, generally, the overall responsibility often sits with federal governments. But, in a country like Canada, for example, they often delegate the direct oversight, the implementation, down to the provincial and territorial levels.
Ah, okay, so it becomes more of a regional thing in practice. What does that look like at those levels?
Well, at the provincial and territorial level, they're usually the ones setting the actual standards for treatment. They issue permits to the facilities saying, how clean the water has to be before discharge. And sometimes they provide funding, too, for infrastructure and upkeep.
Okay, that makes sense. And then the local municipalities, they're involved directly too, right?
Absolutely. Municipal governments typically oversee the day-to-day operations of the treatment plants themselves. And they can even enact stricter local rules if needed, to protect specific local water sources.
Got it. So it's a multi-layered system. Okay, so when the wastewater actually gets to a treatment plant, this is where it gets interesting, I think. Where does the cleaning actually start? You mentioned different levels.
Yes, exactly. We generally talk about three main levels: primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment. Think of it like steps, each one making the water progressively cleaner.
Okay, primary treatment first. What's the main goal there? Removing the big stuff.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Primary treatment is all about removing the large, obvious solids. The very first step is screening. Using screens, often with openings around 10 millimeters or so, they catch things like sticks, rags, general garbage, stuff that shouldn't be in the sewer.
I bet they catch some weird thing.
Oh, definitely. You wouldn't believe some of it. And all that material just gets hauled off to a landfill.
Right. So after screening out the big debris, what's next in primary?
After screening, the water flows into what are called grit chambers. These are designed to slow the flow down just enough so heavier inorganic stuff settles out. Things like sand, cinders, eggshells.
Especially important if you have combined sewers, I guess, where
Yeah.
rainwater mixes in.
Exactly. That stormwater washes a lot of grit into the system. You want to get that out early so it doesn't damage pumps and equipment down the line.
Makes sense. Abrasive stuff. Then sedimentation tanks or clarifiers.
Yep, sedimentation tanks or primary clarifiers. Here, the water slows down even more. And this allows the suspended solids, tiny bits of organic and inorganic matter, to just settle out by gravity. This forms a sludge at the bottom. We call it raw primary biosolids.
And what about stuff that floats, like grease?
Right, lighter stuff like fats, oils, and grease floats to the top and forms a scum layer. So you're basically separating things that sink from things that float.
And then what? Skim the top, pump the bottom?
You got it. The scum is skimmed off, the sludge is removed from the bottom, usually pumped out, and the water that's left, which is partially treated now, moves on to the next stage.
How much pollution is actually removed at this primary stage? Is it significant?
It is, yeah. Primary treatment can take out up to maybe 50% of the biological oxygen demand, or BOD.
BOD. That's about how much oxygen the pollutants use up in the water, right?
Exactly. It measures the potential for the waste to deplete oxygen needed by fish and aquatic life. Primary treatment also gets rid of around 90% of suspended solids, and maybe up to 55% of fecal coliforms.
So a good start, but definitely not clean enough yet.
Definitely not. That partially treated water moves on to secondary treatment.
Okay, secondary treatment. This is where the bacteria come in, right? The microscopic helpers.
That's the one. Bacteria to the rescue. Secondary treatment uses microorganisms, mostly bacteria, to digest the remaining pollutants, especially the dissolved organic stuff that didn't settle out.
Like a biological cleanup crew? How does that work?
Well, the wastewater is mixed with a large population of these bacteria, and crucially, lots of oxygen is added. This is called aeration, pumping air in or using large mixers. The oxygen helps the bacteria work much faster, breaking down the pollutants as food.
So you're creating the perfect environment for them to feast, essentially.
Pretty much, yeah. Giving them the air they need to be efficient decomposers.
And after the bacteria have done their job,
Then the water flows into secondary settling tanks, or secondary clarifiers. Similar to the primary stage, the water slows down again, and this time the clumps of bacteria, now heavy with consumed waste, settle out as sludge. We call this activated sludge. And the water left over is significantly cleaner. We're talking maybe 90–95% free of pollutants by this point.
wow, that's a huge jump in purity. What are the overall removal rates for secondary?
Overall, secondary treatment typically removes about 85–90% of the BOD and suspended solids that were left after primary. And it's really effective against bacteria, removing 90–99% of coliforms.
Impressive. But sometimes even that isn't the end of the line, is it? You mentioned optional steps.
That's right. Some plants might add sand filtration after secondary settling just to polish the water even more, remove finer particles. But a really crucial step before discharge is disinfection.
Right, gotta kill the germs that might still be hanging around. How's that done?
Common methods are chlorine, ozone, or ultraviolet UV light. They all work to kill or inactivate any remaining harmful bacteria, viruses, and other pathogens.
Is there a difference in how they work? I read chlorine leaves a residual.
Yeah, that's a key point. Chlorine provides a residual disinfection effect, meaning it keeps killing germs in the pipes as the water travels. UV light and ozone are very effective right there in the plant, but they don't provide that lasting protection in the distribution system. UV damages their DNA, ozone basically blasts them apart.
Interesting trade-offs there. And I saw something about adjusting pH and adding fluoride around this stage too.
Yes, often after disinfection, the pH is adjusted. This can improve taste, but also helps reduce corrosion in the pipes carrying the water. And fluoride is commonly added in many places for dental health benefits.
So making the water safe and optimizing it for delivery and health. Okay, let's circle back. All that sludge settled out in primary and secondary. What happens to it? You can't just landfill all of it, can you?
Good question. No, that sludge needs treatment too. It's full of organic matter and bacteria. A very common method is anaerobic digestion.
Anaerobic, meaning without oxygen.
Exactly. Specialized bacteria that thrive without oxygen break down the sludge. This usually happens in large heated tanks, maybe around 38 degrees Celsius, for about 10 to 20 days.
And what does that achieve?
It does a couple of really important things.
Okay.
It significantly reduces the volume of the sludge, breaks down the organic matter, and kills pathogens. Plus, it reduces odors.
And I read something about biogas, a useful byproduct.
Yes, that's a major benefit. Anaerobic digestion produces biogas, which is mostly methane and carbon dioxide. This biogas is combustible, so it can be captured and used as fuel, often to heat the digesters themselves or even generate electricity for the plant.
That's fantastic, turning waste into energy, resource recovery.
Absolutely. It can significantly offset the plant's energy costs. It's a really neat, sustainable part of the process.
Okay, so after digestion, what's the final form of the sludge?
After digestion, the sludge is often dewatered. Centrifuges are common. They spin it really fast to separate the remaining liquid from the solids. The liquid, called centrate, usually goes back to the start of the treatment plant. The remaining solid material, now called biosolids, is much more stable. If it meets quality standards, it can often be used beneficially, like as fertilizer on agricultural land.
Closing the loop, returning nutrients to the soil. Cool. Okay, so primary, secondary, disinfection. What if that's still not enough? That's where tertiary comes in, the extra mile treatment.
Precisely. Tertiary treatment, or advanced treatment, tackles specific pollutants that might remain after secondary treatment. Things like residual suspended solids, dissolved substances like color, metals, specific organic chemicals, and very importantly, nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen.
Why are phosphorus and nitrogen such a big deal?
Because excess nutrients in rivers and lakes act like fertilizer, causing huge algae blooms. When the algae die and decompose, it uses up all the oxygen, creating dead zones where fish and other aquatic life can't survive. It's called eutrophication.
Ah, right. So tertiary treatment often focuses on removing those nutrients. How?
It can involve various physical, chemical, or biological processes, depending on what needs removing. A really common and effective biological method is biological nutrient removal, or BNR.
BNR sounds like it uses bacteria again, but in a more targeted way.
Exactly. BNR uses specific sequences of conditions within the bioreactors, zones with oxygen, zones without oxygen, zones with low oxygen. This encourages different types of bacteria to thrive. Some convert ammonia to nitrate, others convert nitrate to harmless nitrogen gas, which just bubbles off into the atmosphere, and other bacteria can be encouraged to take up large amounts of phosphorus.
Wow, it's like orchestrating a microbial ecosystem. How effective is BNR?
Very effective. It can remove over 90% of phosphates, for example, much more than conventional secondary treatment, but it takes time. Wastewater might spend, say, 9 hours or so passing through the different zones in BNR bioreactors.
That really shows the level of engineering involved. Now, we've mostly talked about larger municipal plants. What about smaller towns or rural areas? They can all have complex BNR systems.
Right? Treatment looks quite different in smaller communities. You might see individual septic systems, which we can talk more about, or simpler community systems like municipal lagoons.
Lagoons, like big ponds.
Essentially, yes. Large engineered ponds or reservoirs where wastewater is held for a period. Shallow ones, maybe less than 1.5 meters deep, act mainly for primary settling over days or weeks. Deeper lagoons, over 3 meters, allow for more biological treatment over a much longer time, maybe 6 months to a year. Algae and bacteria do the work. They're often empty just once a year.
And sometimes in rural spots, the soil itself does the treatment.
Yes, if the soil conditions are right, permeable but not too permeable, and it's far enough from wells or surface water, soil treatment can be used. Wastewater is applied to the land, and the natural soil microbes break down the contaminants as the water filters through.
Sounds simple, but I guess there are challenges with these smaller systems.
There can be, yeah. Studies sometimes show higher rates of systems not working quite right in smaller communities, which can risk local water quality. But there's innovation, too. Some places reuse treated wastewater, maybe after a septic tank and extra filtering and ozone disinfection, for non-potable things like flushing toilets or watering lawns.
Resourceful. Okay, let's dig into septic systems specifically. How did those individual household systems work?
Right, so septic systems serve homes not connected to a municipal sewer. All the wastewater flows into a buried septic tank.
And inside the tanks, same idea as primary settling?
Pretty much. Solids settle to the bottom as sludge, grease, and lighter stuff floats as scum. Anaerobic bacteria start breaking down some of the solids in the tank.
Yeah.
Then the partially treated liquid, the effluent, flows out of the tank.
And it goes where?
It flows to a drain field, also called a leach field. This is a series of trenches with gravel and pipes that allow the effluent to slowly seep into the soil.
Ah, so the soil is the main treatment component again.
Exactly. As the water percolates down through the soil, microbes in the soil filter and break down the remaining impurities, bacteria, viruses, nutrients. The soil is a natural biofilter.
But the location and soil type must be critical. I remember reading about potential risks.
Absolutely critical. You need the right kind of soil and, crucially, enough distance from wells. The CDC recommends at least 50 feet, or about 15 meters. If the system fails or the soil isn't suitable or it's too close to a well, septic systems can definitely be a source of groundwater contamination with bacteria and viruses.
So maintenance is key for homeowners. What does that involve?
It really is. Regular inspection, maybe every 3 years. Pumping the tank to remove the sludge every 3 to 5 years is essential. Prevents solids overflowing into the drain field, which can clog it up badly. And just being careful what goes down the drain. No grease, harsh chemicals, non-biodegradable stuff. Even just conserved water helps reduce the load on the system.
A lot of individual responsibility there. Okay, shifting gears slightly. We mentioned lagoons and soil treatment. Are there other ways we try to mimic nature for wastewater treatment? Constructed wetlands?
Yes, constructed wetlands are a great example. These are engineered systems, basically lined cells filled with gravel or sand and planted with wetland vegetation. The wastewater flows through the roots and the substrate, and a whole combination of physical filtering and microbial action, similar to BNR in some ways, cleans the water.
Interesting. Any others?
Sure. There's rapid infiltration, where pre-treated water is applied to sandy basins and it filters quickly down through the ground. Overland flow involves letting water flow over gently sloped vegetated land, usually where the soil isn't very permeable. The plants do most of the filtering. Slow-rate irrigation uses wastewater to irrigate crops or forests, treating it slowly through the soil and plants. Even aquaculture, using aquatic plants and animals, can be used in some specialized systems.
It's really fascinating how we can harness natural processes. I also saw a mention of separating different types of wastewater, black water and gray water.
Yes, that's an area getting more attention. Separating black water, which is from toilets and has most of the pathogens and nutrients, from gray water from sinks, showers, laundry, allows for different approaches. Gray water is much easier to treat and can potentially be reused more readily for non-potable things like irrigation or toilet flushing with minimal treatment.
Yeah.
You also have things like composting toilets or incinerating toilets that avoid using water altogether for that waste stream.
Lots of different strategies. But even with all this technology and these approaches, we still face some big challenges, don't we? Like untreated sewage getting into waterways.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes.
It's a major issue in some areas. Sometimes systems fail, sometimes infrastructure is overwhelmed, especially during heavy rain.
Mhm.
That leads to combined sewer overflows or CSOs. In cities with older combined sewer systems, heavy rain mixes with raw sewage, overwhelms the system capacity, and the mix gets discharged directly into rivers or lakes.
Ugh, that sounds awful. Millions of gallons sometimes.
It can be, yes. A single event can release huge amounts, posing serious health risks and environmental damage. Fixing those old systems is incredibly expensive and disruptive.
A huge infrastructure challenge. And what about industrial waste? That adds another layer of difficulty, right?
Definitely. Industries can produce wastewater with all sorts of complex chemicals, metals, or other substances that typical municipal plants aren't designed to handle effectively. Often, industries are required to pre-treat their wastewater before sending it to the municipal plant, or sometimes they need entirely separate, specialized treatment systems on site. Many industrial chemicals are just very hard to remove.
So it seems like growing populations, more industry, and this increasing desire or need for water reuse are really pushing the limits of our current systems.
That's exactly right. The need for better, more efficient, more resilient, and more sustainable wastewater treatment is constantly growing. And that's driving innovation, pushing the development of advanced technologies to meet those demands and protect our water.
Okay, so to wrap up our deep dive today, we've really walked through the whole journey, haven't we? From the first screens catching debris, through primary settling, the bacterial workhorses of secondary treatment, disinfection, and even advanced tertiary processes like BNR.
hmm And we've touched on how things differ in smaller communities, the role of septic systems, and these really interesting nature-based solutions too.
And it's just crystal clear how vital all of this is for protecting our water quality and, our health.
Absolutely crucial. Couldn't live without it, really.
Right. And effectively treating all these diverse wastewater sources, especially with new contaminants popping up and that challenge of aging infrastructure,
Yeah.
it's complex, it's ongoing. So here's a thought to leave everyone with. Considering all these different levels of treatment and those very real infrastructure challenges, what innovative solutions, whether tech-based or maybe nature-inspired, do you think will be most critical for the future of wastewater management in our communities over the next, say, few decades?
That's a big question. It probably needs a mix of things. Smarter tech, better resource recovery, maybe more decentralized approaches, definitely fixing those leaky pipes and overflows. Lots to think about.
Definitely food for thought. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the essential world of wastewater treatment.
My pleasure. It was a great discussion.
Thank you for listening. In our next episode, we'll be looking ahead at future water technologies. Stay tuned for more.